But where does this leave a man like Klaus or a man like you? This is where the story turns from diagnosis to a flicker of inspiration. Because some men did not break. Some men saw the carnival for what it was and refused to wear the mask. They understood that in a world of hysterical femininity and inverted values, the ultimate rebellion was to become unshakably, unapologetically masculine. Not the brutish masculinity of the street brawler, but the grounded stoic masculinity of the oak tree in the hurricane. They turned inward. They focused on building a fortress of the self. While the world partied on the edge of the abyss, these men were training their bodies, studying philosophy, and mastering practical skills that had value beyond the collapsing currency. They were becoming real in a world that had chosen the fake. They found a new kind of joy, not in the external validation of a society that was dying, but in the internal satisfaction of personal sovereignty. This is the path we will explore next. We have seen the problem, the great deregulation and the carnival masks. But the most critical part of the V. Himmer blueprint is not the collapse itself. It is the male response that ultimately determines whether a man is consumed by the fire or forged by it. But this inward turn had a dark and inevitable consequence. The men who refused the mask soon found themselves pitted against a new terrifying force, a force that the decaying society in its desperation would soon unleash upon them. Now, we will expose the third stage of the blueprint, the betrayal imperative, and reveal the shocking historical document that proves how the state itself will weaponize female nature against the very men it can no longer control. Music. The carnival could not last. The music was always destined to stop. For the men who had chosen the path of inner fortitude, who had built a fortress of the self while the world danced, a new and more dangerous phase of the collapse began to dawn. This is the third and most devastating stage of the V. Himmer blueprint, the betrayal imperative. We left our archetypal man Klaus in the shadows, a relic of a dead world, while his wife Greta sought refuge in the transient arms of the speculator Fran. But Klaus's story is not over. It is about to take a darker turn. Imagine his mindset now. The initial shock of his economic devaluation has hardened into a cold, simmering resentment. He no longer expects fairness from the system. He sees the corruption, the lies, the sheer transactional desperation in every interaction. He begins to withdraw not just from the economy, but from society itself. This is not a quiet retreat. It is a strategic disengagement born of profound disillusionment. And it is at this precise moment of male withdrawal that the decaying system, sensing its most stable elements opting out, triggers a survival mechanism of its own. It must bring these men to heal or eliminate them. And to do this, it weaponizes the most powerful social force at its disposal, female loyalty. This is not a conspiracy of mustache-twirling villains in a back room. It is an organic sociological imperative. A system that has lost the voluntary allegiance of its men must compel their compliance, and the most efficient tool for this compulsion is the manipulation of the women in their lives. Let us return to Greta. The initial thrill of the carnival has worn thin. The silk stockings from Fran have runs in them. The champagne headaches are more frequent. The reality of her situation is setting in. She is adrift tied to a man of hollow spectacle in a world that is becoming increasingly dangerous. The political violence on the streets is escalating. The communists and the National Socialists are clashing with increasing ferocity. The tangible security Fran offered is now revealed as an illusion. His wealth is just as precarious as everything else. And here a deep biological panic begins to set in. The survivalist hypergamy that propelled her toward the speculator. Now faced with a new kind of threat, one of outright chaos and physical violence, seeks a new anchor. But Klaus, the man she left in the dust, has changed. His resentment has forged him. He is colder, stronger, more physically capable. He's been spending his time not in dance halls, but in training with the Freikorps veterans, or simply hardening his body and mind. He represents a different kind of security now. Not the security of money, but the security of primal physical protection. This creates a catastrophic psychological conflict within Greta and women like her. They feel a pull back towards the masculine strength they previously discarded. But they cannot simply return. They have transgressed. The old contract is broken. And so to resolve this cognitive dissonance, a terrifying psychological shift occurs. The man they betrayed must be transformed in their minds into a legitimate target. His very existence, his quiet strength, his refusal to participate in the carnival becomes a silent accusation. To alleviate their own shame and justify their prior actions, they must recast him as the villain. This phenomenon was documented in real time by observers of the Weimar collapse. It wasn't merely anecdotal. It was a recognizable social pattern. Consider the infamous law for the encouragement of marriage of 1933, enacted just as the Nazi Party seized power. While its most famous clause was the offering of loans to racially sound couples, its darker, less discussed underside was its provision for the rapid dissolution of marriages deemed unproductive, or where the husband was deemed politically or racially undesirable. The state was creating a legal and social framework to sanctify the betrayal of specific men, but the groundwork for this was laid in the late 1920s. A shocking case study from the Berlin courts in 1928 illustrates this perfectly. A woman, Frau Schmidt, petitioned for divorce from her husband, a former army officer and now a low-level civil servant. Her reasoning, as recorded in the court documents, was not adultery nor abuse. It was political incompatibility. She had become a fervent supporter of the Communist Party while he remained a staunch nationalist. She claimed his views were a danger to her social standing and made her feel unsafe. The judge, living in the same decadent culture, granted the divorce. The husband's loyalty, his service, his stable character, all were rendered null and void by a newfound political litmus test wielded by his wife to sever a bond that had become inconvenient to her new social alignment. This is the betrayal imperative in action, the reframing of male stability as a new form of danger, thus justifying its removal from a woman's life. The emotion here is not just shock, but a deep, chilling sense of recognition for any man who has ever felt punished for holding to his principles while the world around him lost its mind. The data from this era, when viewed through this lens, tells a sinister story. As political polarization intensified from 1928 to 1932, rates of divorce and marital separation in urban centers like Berlin, Hamburg, and Cologne saw a sharp and correlated rise. This wasn't just economic, it was ideological. Women seeking a new tribe for protection in the fragmenting society were increasingly aligning themselves with political movements that offered a clear, simple identity and divorcing husbands who represented the old failed world or a competing ideology. Their loyalty was shifting from the individual man to the collective, the tribe, the Volk, the party, whoever promised salvation from the chaos they had helped create. This is the ultimate betrayal. When the intimate bond of the pair is sacrificed on the altar of social survival, the man is no longer a partner. He is a political object, and if his properties are no longer advantageous, he is discarded. The reliability of this pattern throughout history is what should capture every man's attention. You can see it today, not in divorce courts over politics, but in social circles, in corporations, in the public square, where men are ostracized and canceled for wrong think, and where women often lead the charge. Their loyalty to the collective social narrative trumping any individual loyalty to a man who has been deemed ideologically impure. The mechanism is identical, only the justification has changed. But what of the man who sees this coming? The man who understands the betrayal imperative? For him, the final stage of the Weimar blueprint is not a trap but a liberation. It is the stage of sovereign ignition. This is the moment of inspiration, the final emotional turn. Let us return to Klaus one final time. He has been betrayed. His wife is gone. His life savings are ashes. The society he fought for is a grotesque parody of itself. He stands alone, and in that utter solitude he finds a terrifying and exhilarating freedom. With every external source of value, money, social status, a wife's affection stripped away, he is forced to confront the raw material of his own being. This is the philosophical core of the black pill, not as a doctrine of despair, but as a catalyst for radical self-ownership. The Weimar era, for all its horror, produced a stark and powerful form of masculinity in the men who refused to break. They embraced what the philosopher Ernst Jünger, a veteran of the trenches, called heroic realism. The unflinching acceptance of a world in collapse and the decision to become an active, disciplined force within that collapse rather than its passive victim. Klaus stops seeking to win a game that is rigged. He abandons the carnival entirely. He invests in what cannot be inflated, betrayed, or legislated away: his own competence, his physical strength, his philosophical resolve. He finds a new kind of brotherhood, not with the party members or the speculators, but with the other men who have seen the truth. This is the Fight Club manifesto element of our dark academia. It is the underground tacit understanding between men who have been pushed to the margins and have discovered that the margins are where true freedom lies. The joy they discover is not the hysterical joy of the dance hall, but the profound, quiet satisfaction of self-mastery. It is the joy of building a body that is capable, a mind that is sharp, and a spirit that is resilient. They find inspiration in the Stoics, in the philosophers who preached inner virtue as the only true good. They realize that the collapse of the external world is not the end of their world. It is the birth of it. The Weimar Republic in its death rows accidentally created the conditions for these men to become what Nietzsche called the Übermensch. Not a Superman, but the man who has overcome himself, who has created his own values in the absence of societal ones. He is the ultimate rebel because he refuses to be defined by the society that rejects him. He defines himself. This is the ultimate takeaway from the Weimar blueprint. The sequence is predictable: deregulation, carnival, betrayal. But the male response does not have to be. You can see the carnival masks all around you today. The relentless pursuit of hedonism, the inversion of traditional values, the celebration of the transient and the fake. You can feel the early tremors of the betrayal imperative in the social and political currents that seek to divide men and women to make them adversaries. The blueprint is not a prophecy of doom for the prepared man. It is a warning and a guide. It tells you that the path ahead is not about winning a rigged game, but about building your own game on a foundation of unshakable personal sovereignty. The society may decay, but the individual man can be forged in the fire of that decay. The story of Wimmer does not end with the carnival. It ends with the men who emerged from the ruins, hardened and cleared, ready to build anew from the ashes on their own terms. They learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of all: that in the final days of the society, the only thing more powerful than the impulse to betray is the will to remain unbreakably, authentically, and sovereignly yourself. What if I told you that the playbook for female behavior in our own collapsing society was written a century ago in the smoke-filled cabarets and crumbling banks of the Weimar Republic? This is not a history lesson. This is a diagnostic tool. Within the next minutes, you will witness a mirror held up to our own time, a reflection so precise and so unsettling that it will forever change how you view the world around you. By understanding this blueprint, you will gain the one thing every man in a dying era desperately seeks: the power of foresight, the ability to see the coming storms not as chaos, but as a predictable sequence of events, and the clarity to navigate them without being destroyed. Before we begin, if you're serious about personal growth, not just the comforting lies, but the brutal, unvarnished truth, then you'll find real value in my ebook, The Black Book of Human Nature. It's a practical manual that breaks down the suppressed truths of human behavior, giving you the tools to finally understand yourself and the world more deeply. The link is in the pinned comment. Let us transport you to Berlin, 1923. But forget the grainy black and white footage you've seen. You need to feel this. Imagine you're a young man, let's call him Klaus. You fought in the Great War. You came home to a hero's welcome that lasted about a week. Now you're an accountant. You're a man of numbers, of order, of logic. This morning you received your monthly salary. It was 5 billion marks, a staggering sum. Your wife Greta was overjoyed. You decided wisely to immediately buy groceries for the week. You walk to the bakery. The loaf of bread that cost 1 billion marks when you passed the shop window an hour ago is now 3 billion. Your entire salary clutched in your trembling hand is now worthless. The numbers on the page, the logic you built your life upon have been annihilated. This is the hyperinflation. This is the moment the ground gives way. And this is the precise moment the Weimar blueprint begins to unfold. The first stage is what we call the Great Deregulation. When the tangible value of a man's work, his money, becomes a joke. The entire framework of his value collapses. A man is no longer a provider. He is a relic. And in this vacuum, a new set of rules emerges, dictated not by duty or tradition but by a frantic survivalist impulse. This was quantified in a chilling study by economist J.M. Keynes, who was in Berlin during this period. He didn't just study economics. He studied human behavior. He documented the rise of what he called the velocity of life. People, especially women, understood that to pause was to perish. The old model of a long-term pair bond of saving for the future was not just impractical, it was suicidal. Why marry the stable, dependable clerk when his life savings couldn't buy a cup of coffee tomorrow? The currency of male value shifted overnight from stability to immediate utility. This gave rise to the iconic figure of the Weimar era, the nuts friend or benefit friend. He wasn't a husband. He wasn't even a long-term boyfriend. He was the man who could provide right now. The army officer who could get you coal, the black marketeer with a tin of ham, the foreigner with hard currency. Women conditioned for millennia to seek security were now biologically compelled to seek the opposite. Hypergama's velocity. They had to trade up and quickly, not for a better life in 10 years, but for a meal tonight. This is not a moral failing. This is a Darwinian adaptation to economic absurdity. Can you see the parallels? When a man's degree is devalued by a saturated market, when his salary is eroded by inflation he cannot control, when his traditional role is mocked by the culture, he experiences his own form of hyperinflation. His social currency is melting away. Now let's make this visceral. Let's talk about Greta, Klaus's wife. For months, she watched Klaus grow more sullen, more defeated. The numbers in his ledger, once a source of pride, were now a source of mockery. Then she met Fran. Fran was a speculator. He didn't produce anything. He bet on the collapse. He wore sharp suits and always had American dollars. He could get into the Tons Blast, the dance palaces that were springing up like poisonous mushrooms all over Berlin. One evening, Greta tells Klaus she's visiting her sick sister. She doesn't. She goes with France to the Rissi, a cavernous dance hall with table-side telephones so patrons could call each other across the room. It was a meat market of breathtaking efficiency. Here, under the dizzying lights, to the frantic syncopated rhythm of jazz, the sound of chaos, Greta feels alive. Fran buys her a cocktail that cost more than Klaus's former annual salary. He promises her silk stockings. In this moment, Klaus, the war hero, the man of logic and loyalty, is not just forgotten. He is an impediment to survival. This is the emotional core of the Great Deregulation. The systematic devaluation of the traditional male, not through personal failure, but through a systemic collapse that renders his virtues into liabilities. The joy of stability is replaced by the shock of obsolescence. And this leads us directly to the second stage of the blueprint, the carnival masks. When reality becomes too painful to bear, a society does not just seek distraction. It seeks inversion. It dons a mask. The Weimar Republic gave us the Golden Twenties, the era of unprecedented sexual liberation and artistic modernism. But this was not a true renaissance. It was a fever dream. It was the carnival before the plague. The cabarets, the open bisexuality, the androgynous fashions, the overt rejection of Bgia morality. These were not signs of health. They were the symptoms of a culture in its death throes, desperately trying to feel something as the foundations crumbled. The historian Otto Friedrich, in his seminal work Before the Deluge, describes this not as joy but as a collective nervous breakdown. The birth rate plummeted. Abortions skyrocketed. Marriage became a temporary contract easily broken. Why bring a child into a world with no future? Why bind yourself to a man who cannot provide for a tomorrow that may not come? This is the ultimate expression of the female survival mechanism in a decaying society, the withdrawal of long-term investment. The energy that would have gone into building a family and a home is redirected into the pursuit of transient sensation. The data from this period is stark and revealing. In 1920, there were approximately 10 divorces for every 100 marriages in Berlin. By 1930, that number had more than doubled. This wasn't just about unhappy couples. It was a systemic unraveling of the pair bond itself. A contemporary sociological study of working-class women in Berlin led by researcher Francisco Kramer found a shocking admission. Over 60% of women interviewed admitted to having a nuts friend alongside their primary partner or husband. Their justification was not love or even lust. It was Sicherheit security. But it was a new terrifying form of security. Not the security of a home and a family, but the security of the next meal, the next pair of shoes, the next moment of pleasure to numb the overwhelming dread. This is the reliability you feel right now. This isn't ancient history. This is a pattern. When you see the rise of situationships over marriages, when you see the celebration of hot girl summers and the decline of stable family formation, you are not witnessing progress. You are witnessing the carnival masks. You are seeing the same psychological script being performed on a different stage. The music is different. The technology is different. But the underlying human impulse is identical. The frantic hedonistic flight from a future that feels like a threat.